They called him Waste Disposal. In the floating palace of Calvarith, where alien minds shaped the destiny of 1,000 worlds, Darien Voss pushed his cleaning cart through corridors that whispered of his worthlessness. The Empress Zaylur had decreed it. Humans were biological accidents, fit only for menial labor beneath the notice of superior beings. But in the deepest maintenance shafts, where forbidden mechanical theories pulsed through his calloused hands, Darien built something that would make empires kneel. Tonight, when their perfect system screams and dies, they will learn what human genius truly means. Subscribe to witness the moment when the mocked become the mighty. The morning shift began with the familiar weight of contempt pressing against Darien's shoulders like a physical force. He wheeled his maintenance cart through the crystalline corridors of the citadel of Calvarith, each step echoing in the vast spaces designed to dwarf lesser beings. The floating palace stretched a full kilometer into the amber sky above Esterin Prime's gas oceans, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with the heartbeat of an empire that spanned 3 galactic arms. Here, in these sacred halls, where only the most brilliant alien minds were permitted to walk, Darien Voss existed as a shadow, a necessary contamination that the Galactic Crown tolerated but never acknowledged. The Zephyrian nobles glided past him on their anti-gravity platforms, their elongated skulls crowned with neural interfaces that sparkled like captured starlight, their conversations flowing in mathematical languages that supposedly transcended human comprehension. To them, he was furniture with a pulse, a biological cleaning mechanism that required no more consideration than the automated scrubbers that polished their floors. The irony burned in his chest like swallowed acid as he navigated toward the lower maintenance levels, where the real work of keeping this monument to alien superiority functional took place. 42 years of life had taught Darien that invisibility could be a gift as much as a curse, and in the 18 months since his assignment to Calvarith, he had learned to move through these spaces like a ghost with purpose. The other species, the insectoid Kithara with their compound eyes that missed nothing, the gaseous ethereals who communicated through electromagnetic pulses, the crystalline Vorthon whose thoughts moved at light speed, all possessed cognitive abilities that the Galactic Crown proclaimed superior to human neural architecture. Yet none of them noticed the way Darien's eyes tracked the energy conduits that snaked through the walls, cataloguing inefficiencies and design flaws that their advanced minds had somehow overlooked. None of them saw how his fingers traced the junction points, where power distribution created bottlenecks that violated the fundamental principles of energy conservation. None of them realized that the human pushing the cleaning cart possessed a doctorate in theoretical mechanics from the underground universities of Earth, knowledge that the Crown had declared forbidden and dangerous. The descent into the lower levels always felt like traveling backward through time, each floor stripping away another layer of the Empire's polished facade to reveal the crude mechanical reality beneath. Here, where the artificial gravity generators hummed with barely contained power, and the atmospheric processors labored to maintain the precise environmental conditions that each species required. The true complexity of maintaining this floating palace became apparent. Darien's official duties involved cleaning the ventilation shafts and maintaining the filtration systems that kept the air breathable for dozens of different respiratory systems. But his real work began when the last supervisor departed for the upper levels. In the forgotten spaces between the primary systems, where emergency access panels opened onto maintenance corridors that appeared on no official schematics, Darien had discovered something that made his heart race with possibilities. The energy distribution network that powered the entire citadel was built on principles that human engineers had theorized centuries ago but never been permitted to implement. A cascading resonance system that could amplify power output exponentially if properly configured. The alien designers had created a masterwork of inefficiency, their superior minds somehow blind to the elegant solution that danced just beyond their perception. Tonight, like every night for the past 6 months, Darian would continue his secret project in the abandoned maintenance bay that he had claimed as his workshop. The components he needed were scattered throughout the Citadel's vast infrastructure. Discarded power cells from decommissioned systems, crystalline matrices that the Vorthan engineers had deemed flawed, bio-neural processors that the ethereals had rejected for their organic impurities. To the aliens, these were waste products, technological debris to be disposed of by the human janitor whose presence they barely acknowledged. But Darian saw them for what they truly were, the building blocks of a machine that would revolutionize energy production throughout the galaxy, a device that would prove once and for all that human ingenuity could surpass even the most advanced alien intellects. The theoretical framework existed in his mind, like a three-dimensional blueprint, each component precisely positioned to create a resonance cascade that would multiply input energy by factors that current galactic science deemed impossible. He had run the calculations 1,000 times, checking and rechecking every variable, every potential failure point, every quantum interaction that could destabilize the delicate balance required for the system to function. The weight of secrecy pressed against him as he reached his assigned sector. The knowledge that discovery would mean not just his death, but the systematic elimination of every human in the galactic territories. The Crown's laws regarding forbidden technology were absolute. Any species that attempted to develop or implement banned innovations faced complete extinction, their worlds reduced to radioactive cinders as an example to others who might dare to challenge the established order. Yet Darian could not abandon his work, could not ignore the voice in his mind that whispered of humanity's potential, of the day when his people would no longer kneel before alien masters who proclaimed their superiority while remaining blind to their own limitations. The machine taking shape in his hidden workshop represented more than just a technological breakthrough. It was a declaration of human worth, a proof that the species the Crown had relegated to menial labor possessed minds capable of reshaping the very foundations of galactic civilization. As he began his cleaning routine, moving through the familiar motions that had become second nature, Darian allowed himself to imagine the moment when his invention would pulse to life, when the impossible would become reality, and when the aliens who had mocked humanity's intelligence would finally understand the true meaning of human genius. The day stretched before him like a carefully choreographed dance of servitude and secret purpose, each hour bringing him closer to the completion of his life's work. In the depths of the Citadel, where the heartbeat of an empire pulsed through conduits and processes that he alone truly understood, Darian Voss prepared to change the course of galactic history with nothing more than discarded components and the forbidden knowledge that burned like a star in his human mind. The afternoon brought Empress Zaylur's inspection tour, a monthly ritual that transformed the Citadel's usual atmosphere of casual disdain into something approaching religious fervor. Darian watched from the shadows of a maintenance alcove as the procession approached, led by the Empress herself, a being whose 3-meter frame moved with the fluid grace of someone who had never questioned her right to rule over lesser species. Her biomechanical crown interfaced directly with her enlarged cranium, streams of data flowing through neural pathways that had been enhanced over 3 centuries of life to process information at speeds that made human thought seem glacial by comparison. The entourage that followed her represented the pinnacle of galactic evolution. Kithara scientists whose compound eyes could perceive 17 different spectrums of light simultaneously. Vorthan engineers whose crystalline bodies resonated with the fundamental frequencies of matter itself. And ethereal philosophers whose gaseous forms existed partially in dimensions that solid beings could barely comprehend. To witness their collective intelligence in motion was to understand why the Galactic Crown had declared human cognitive abilities primitive and obsolete, why Earth's children had been relegated to the role of biological janitors in a universe that had evolved beyond their capacity to contribute. The Empress paused directly in front of Darian's hiding place, her attention drawn to a minor fluctuation in the power grid that her enhanced senses had detected. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the harmonic frequencies that marked her as a member of the Zephyrian ruling caste, each word precisely modulated to convey not just meaning, but emotional undertones that lesser species were supposedly incapable of fully grasping. She discussed the anomaly with her chief engineer, a Vorton whose crystalline form pulsed with analytical light as he processed the data streams flowing from the Citadel's monitoring systems. Their conversation unfolded in the mathematical language of pure logic, equations and theorems, flowing between them like poetry, their minds working in perfect synchronization to identify and resolve the minor inefficiency that had caught the Empress's attention. Darian listened from his concealment, his human brain automatically translating their mathematical discourse into concepts he could understand, and felt his heart sink as he realized they were discussing the exact power distribution problem that his hidden machine was designed to solve. The cruel irony of the moment pressed against him like a physical weight as he watched these supposedly superior beings struggle with a challenge that human engineering had solved centuries ago. The Vorthan engineer's analysis was methodical and thorough, his crystalline matrix processing thousands of variables per second, yet he remained blind to the elegant solution that danced just beyond his perception. The Empress herself contributed insights that demonstrated cognitive abilities far beyond human norms, her enhanced neural pathways identifying patterns and correlations that would have taken human scientists years to discover. Yet she too failed to grasp the fundamental principle that would revolutionize their entire energy infrastructure. They spoke of incremental improvements and minor optimizations, of gradual efficiency gains that might reduce power consumption by fractions of a percent, never realizing that the human janitor hiding mere meters away possessed the knowledge to multiply their energy output by orders of magnitude. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, a masterclass in advanced alien intelligence that ultimately concluded with the decision to implement a series of minor adjustments that would improve system efficiency by less than 2%. As the procession moved on, leaving Darian alone with his thoughts and his growing sense of frustrated purpose, he found himself questioning the fundamental assumptions that governed galactic society. How could beings of such obvious intelligence remain so completely blind to solutions that seemed obvious to human perception? The answer, he realized, lay not in any inherent superiority of human cognition, but in the different approaches that various species took to problem-solving. The aliens had evolved beyond the need for intuitive leaps and creative insights, their enhanced minds capable of processing vast amounts of data with perfect logical precision, but somehow lacking the spark of innovative thinking that had once driven human technological advancement. They could analyze and optimize existing systems with incredible efficiency, but they struggled to envision entirely new approaches that violated their established paradigms. Their superiority was real and undeniable, but it came with limitations that they refused to acknowledge, blind spots that their enhanced perception somehow failed to detect. The realization filled Darian with a mixture of excitement and terror, as he contemplated the implications of his discovery. If his analysis was correct, then humanity's supposed cognitive inferiority might actually represent a different kind of intelligence, one that the Galactic Crown had dismissed as primitive, but which possessed unique capabilities that their advanced minds lacked. The machine hidden in his workshop represented more than just a technological breakthrough. It was proof that human thinking could achieve results that alien logic could not, that the species relegated to cleaning duties possessed insights that could revolutionize galactic civilization. Yet the same realization that filled him with hope also reminded him of the terrible risks he was taking, the knowledge that discovery would mean not just his own death, but the complete annihilation of his species. The Crown's intolerance for challenges to their established order was absolute. Their response to any threat to their technological supremacy swift and merciless. The weight of that knowledge settled over him like a shroud as he resumed his cleaning duties, moving through the familiar routines that had become his cover for the most important work of his life. Each component he had salvaged, each calculation he had performed, each hour spent in his hidden workshop brought him closer to a moment of truth that would either vindicate humanity's potential or seal their doom. In the depths of the Citadel, where the heartbeat of an empire pulsed through systems that he alone truly understood, Darian Voss carried the hopes and fears of his entire species in his calloused hands, knowing that the next few days would determine whether humans would remain forever in the shadows or finally step into the light of galactic recognition. The descent to his secret workshop always felt like a pilgrimage to Darian, each step down the forgotten maintenance shaft bringing him closer to the heart of his rebellion against galactic orthodoxy. The abandoned bay lay 3 levels below the official maintenance areas, accessible only through a service tunnel that had been sealed and forgotten when the Citadel's original construction crews departed centuries ago. Darian had discovered it during his first month of service, drawn by the subtle vibrations that indicated proximity to the main power conduits, and had spent weeks carefully removing the biomechanical seals that blocked access without triggering the automated security systems. Now, as he squeezed through the narrow opening that he had widened just enough to accommodate his human frame, he felt the familiar thrill of entering a space that belonged entirely to him, the only place in the entire Citadel where his presence was not merely tolerated, but essential. The chamber beyond was roughly spherical, its walls lined with the organic metal that formed the Citadel's superstructure, surfaces that pulsed with a faint bioluminescence that provided just enough light for human eyes to navigate by. The machine that dominated the center of the workshop had grown over the months from a collection of salvaged components into something that resembled a technological organism. Its various systems integrated with a precision that would have impressed even the Vorthan engineers, who had dismissed its individual parts as worthless. The core was built around a crystalline matrix that Darian had rescued from a disposal unit, its flawed structure actually perfect for the resonance patterns he needed to generate. Surrounding it were bio-neural processors that the ethereals had rejected for their organic impurities, their living circuits ideal for the adaptive responses required to maintain system stability under the extreme conditions his machine would create. Power cells, salvaged from decommissioned systems, provided the initial energy input, their supposedly depleted charges still containing enough potential to trigger the cascade reaction that would multiply their output exponentially. Each component had been carefully positioned according to calculations that existed nowhere in galactic databases, theoretical frameworks that human scientists had developed in secret during the dark years following Earth's subjugation. Tonight's work focused on the final calibration of the resonance chambers, the delicate process of tuning each crystalline element to vibrate at precisely the frequency required to create the cascade effect. Darian's hands moved with the confidence born of months of practice, his fingers tracing the surface of each crystal as he made minute adjustments to their molecular structure, using techniques that the Crown had banned for their potential to destabilize matter itself. The mathematics involved were staggering in their complexity, quantum equations that described the interaction between energy and consciousness in ways that challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic physics. Yet to Darian, they felt as natural as breathing, the logical extension of principles that human minds had grasped intuitively even before they possessed the technology to implement them. Each adjustment brought the system closer to the critical threshold where theory would become reality, where the impossible would pulse to life in defiance of everything the galactic establishment believed about the limits of energy manipulation. The irony of his situation was not lost on him as he worked. Here he was, a human janitor dismissed as cognitively inferior, implementing theoretical frameworks that the galaxy's most advanced minds had declared impossible. The Empress Zhe-Lur herself had published papers on the mathematical impossibility of cascade resonance, her enhanced intellect proving conclusively that such systems would collapse into quantum chaos within nanoseconds of activation. The Vorthan engineers had run countless simulations demonstrating that the energy requirements for stable cascade generation exceeded the output of entire star systems. The ethereal philosophers had written treatises on the fundamental incompatibility between consciousness and the quantum states required for resonance amplification. Yet none of them had considered the possibility that their enhanced minds, for all their computational power and logical precision, might be missing something essential, the spark of creative intuition that allowed human consciousness to perceive solutions that pure logic could not reach. As the hours passed and his adjustments brought the machine closer to completion, Darian found himself thinking about the moment when his creation would first pulse to life, when the theoretical would become actual and the impossible would announce itself to a galaxy that had forgotten how to dream. The cascade reaction, once initiated, would propagate through the Citadel's entire power grid, multiplying energy output by factors that would make the floating palace the most powerful installation in galactic space. The aliens who had mocked human intelligence would watch in stunned silence as their most fundamental assumptions about energy physics crumbled before the evidence of human genius. The Empress, who had declared his species cognitively obsolete, would find herself dependent on technology that only human minds had been capable of conceiving. The empire that had relegated humanity to the role of biological janitors would discover that their servants possessed the key to unlimited power. The final adjustment required a precision that pushed even Darian's enhanced understanding to its limits. The delicate process of synchronizing 17 different resonance frequencies into a harmonic pattern that would remain stable under the extreme conditions of cascade amplification. His hands trembled slightly as he made the last microscopic changes to the crystalline matrix, knowing that a single error could destabilize the entire system and reduce months of work to a pile of quantum debris. The mathematics sang in his mind like a symphony of pure possibility, each equation building upon the last to create a theoretical framework that transcended the boundaries between science and art. When the final calibration was complete, when the last frequency had been tuned to mathematical perfection, Darian stepped back and gazed upon his creation with the satisfaction of someone who had just rewritten the fundamental laws of physics through nothing more than human ingenuity and forbidden knowledge. The crisis began at 0347 Galactic Standard Time, when the first power fluctuations rippled through the Citadel's energy grid like the death throes of a dying star. Darian felt the disturbance before the automated systems registered it, his human intuition somehow attuned to the subtle changes in the electromagnetic field that permeated the floating palace. He was in the upper maintenance levels, completing his routine cleaning duties, When the lights flickered and the familiar hum of the gravity generators shifted to a discordant whine that spoke of systems pushed beyond their design limits. Within minutes, emergency klaxons were echoing through the crystalline corridors as the Citadel's most advanced minds struggled to comprehend what their instruments were telling them. The Empire's most secure installation was experiencing a catastrophic power failure that threatened to send the kilometer-high palace plummeting into the gas oceans below. The irony was devastating in its completeness. The Galactic Crown's technological supremacy was failing at the moment when they needed it most, their war against the rebel systems reaching a critical juncture that demanded every ounce of power the Empire could generate. The Empress Zalur's voice cut through the chaos like a blade of pure authority, her enhanced vocal cords projecting commands that reached every corner of the Citadel simultaneously. Emergency protocols activated throughout the palace as the Empire's finest engineers converged on the primary power distribution center. Their various forms of advanced intelligence focused on a problem that seemed to defy all logical analysis. The Vorthan crystals pulsed with computational light as they processed terabytes of diagnostic data, their crystalline minds working in perfect synchronization to identify the source of the cascade failure. The ethereal philosophers shifted into their pure energy forms, their consciousness merging with the power grid itself to trace the propagation of the system collapse through quantum dimensions that solid beings could barely perceive. The Kithara scientists deployed their compound eyes to examine the infrastructure from 17 different spectral perspectives simultaneously, their insectoid forms scuttling through access tunnels with mechanical precision as they searched for physical damage that might explain the impossible failure. Yet for all their enhanced abilities and superior intellects, the alien engineers found themselves confronting a mystery that their advanced minds could not solve. The power grid was failing according to patterns that violated every known principle of energy physics, the cascade collapse propagating through systems that should have been isolated from each other by multiple redundant safeguards. The mathematical models that governed their understanding of power distribution predicted that such a failure was impossible, yet the evidence of their instruments could not be denied. The Citadel's energy infrastructure was dying, and they had no idea why. Darian watched from the shadows as panic began to creep into their perfectly logical discussions, their enhanced minds struggling to process the reality of a problem that their theoretical frameworks could not explain. The Empress herself descended to the engineering levels, her biomechanical crown interfacing directly with the diagnostic systems as she applied 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge to a crisis that seemed to mock everything she understood about the universe. The war situation made the crisis infinitely more desperate, reports flooding in from across the galactic territories as rebel forces pressed their advantage against an empire suddenly crippled by power failures. The cascade collapse was not limited to the Citadel. Similar failures were occurring throughout the Crown's infrastructure, their most secure installations going dark one by one as the mysterious phenomenon spread through the quantum substrates that connected their power grids. Military commanders screamed for reinforcements that could not be deployed. Their warships stranded in space as their energy systems succumbed to the same inexplicable failure that was consuming the Empire's technological foundation. The rebels, somehow immune to the cascade collapse, pressed forward with renewed vigor, their inferior technology suddenly proving more reliable than the Crown's advanced systems. In the space of hours, the Galactic Crown's technological supremacy had become a liability, their enhanced infrastructure more vulnerable than the primitive systems they had spent centuries mocking. As the crisis deepened and the alien engineers exhausted every theoretical possibility in their desperate search for solutions, Darian felt the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders like a mantle of stars. In his hidden workshop, 3 levels below the chaos consuming the upper citadel, his machine waited in perfect readiness. The theoretical framework made manifest the impossible solution to a problem that the galaxy's most advanced minds could not even comprehend. The cascade resonance system that he had built from discarded components and forbidden knowledge represented more than just a technological breakthrough. It was humanity's answer to the Empire's arrogance, the proof that human ingenuity could succeed where alien logic failed. The irony was perfect in its symmetry. The same power grid that was failing throughout the Empire could be saved by the very technology that the Crown had declared impossible, implemented by the species they had dismissed as cognitively inferior. The moment of truth approached like an inexorable tide, each passing minute bringing the citadel closer to catastrophic failure, while the solution waited in the hands of a human janitor whom the Empire had never bothered to notice. In the depths of the floating palace, where the heartbeat of galactic civilization grew weaker with each pulse, Darien Voss prepared to step out of the shadows and into the light of history, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether humanity would remain forever invisible or finally claim their rightful place among the stars. The Empress Zalur descended through the citadel's core like a falling star wrapped in imperial fury, her crystalline form refracting the emergency lighting into fractured rainbows that danced across the walls. Each step echoed with the weight of 3 centuries of absolute rule. Yet now those steps carried her toward something that defied every law she had carved into the galaxy's flesh. The corridors that had once witnessed only the whispered reverence of alien dignitaries now trembled with the sound of her approach, as if the very architecture recognized that its mistress was walking toward the impossible. Her retinue of advisors followed at a distance, their bioluminescent patches flickering with barely contained terror, for they had never seen their empress move with such desperate urgency. The energy readings from the lower levels pulsed through their neural implants like a heartbeat that belonged to no known species, yet somehow sustained the very life of their empire. The maintenance shafts grew narrower as they descended, forcing the imperial procession to abandon their ceremonial formations and move in single file through passages designed for the lowest castes. Zalur's robes, woven from the silk of extinct star moths, caught on the rough metal edges that had never been meant to accommodate royalty, yet she pressed forward without pause. The air grew thick with the scent of human labor, sweat, determination, and something else that her enhanced senses couldn't categorize, but that made her crystalline skin crawl with unfamiliar sensations. Behind her, Lord Kethmore's breathing apparatus wheezed with each step, his aquatic lungs struggling in the dry atmosphere that humans somehow thrived in. The deeper they went, the more the citadel felt like it was transforming around them, as if the very concept of hierarchy was being rewritten by forces they had never imagined could exist within their perfect order. When they finally reached the source of the impossible energy signature, Zalur stopped so abruptly that her entire retinue collided in a cascade of alien limbs and startled exclamations. Before them, in a chamber that should have contained nothing but waste recyclers and atmospheric processors, stood a machine that defied every principle of galactic engineering. Its surface seemed to drink in light, while simultaneously radiating a warmth that had nothing to do with thermal output, and its geometric patterns followed mathematical principles that made her 300-year-old mind reel with vertigo. The device hummed with a frequency that resonated in her bones, speaking a language of pure energy that her empire's greatest scientists had declared impossible for millennia. Around its base, scattered tools and component parts told the story of countless hours of secret labor, each piece carefully chosen and precisely placed by hands that understood secrets the Galactic Crown had forgotten or never learned. The human stood beside his creation like a monument to everything her empire had dismissed as primitive and worthless, his simple maintenance uniform somehow transformed into the robes of a new kind of royalty. Darian Voss didn't bow, didn't acknowledge her presence with the terror that had defined every encounter she had ever had with lesser beings, but instead continued to monitor his machine's output with the calm attention of someone who had already transcended the need for imperial approval. His weathered hands moved across control surfaces that shouldn't have existed, adjusting parameters that violated the fundamental laws her scientists had spent centuries perfecting, and with each touch, the Citadel's energy grid grew stronger and more stable. The Empress found herself studying his face, searching for some sign of the deception or alien influence that could explain this impossibility, but finding only the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who had finally completed his masterpiece. In that moment, she realized that everything she had believed about human limitations had been not just wrong, but catastrophically, empire-threateningly wrong. The silence stretched between them like a bridge, spanning the gap between two different universes, one where humans cleaned flaws, and another where they commanded the very forces that kept civilizations alive. Z'Lur's advisors shifted nervously behind her, their various respiratory systems creating a symphony of alien anxiety as they waited for their Empress to speak, to act, to restore the natural order that this human's existence had shattered. But the words that had always come so easily to her, the commands that had shaped the destiny of 1,000 worlds, seemed to have abandoned her in the presence of this impossible achievement. The machine's gentle humming filled the space where her authority should have been, and she found herself wondering if the sound it made was what power actually sounded like when it wasn't wrapped in ceremony and fear. For the first time in 3 centuries, Empress Z'Lur stood in the presence of something that didn't need her permission to exist, and the experience was both terrifying and strangely liberating. The energy readings on her personal display showed numbers that made her question not just her understanding of physics, but her understanding of what it meant to rule an empire built on technological supremacy. This human, this creature she had dismissed as barely worthy of cleaning her floors, had created something that surpassed every achievement in her empire's glorious history, and he had done it in secret, in darkness, with nothing but salvaged parts and forbidden knowledge. The implications crashed over her like a wave of liquid starlight, each realization more devastating than the last. If humans could do this, what else had her empire missed? What other miracles had they dismissed as impossible simply because they came from the wrong species? The machine pulsed again, sending another surge of perfect energy through the Citadel's grid, and with it came the undeniable truth that the galaxy's future had just been rewritten by hands she had never bothered to notice. Lord Kethmore's aquatic features contorted into expressions that had no equivalent in human emotion, as he stared at the readings flowing across his bio-integrated display, each number a nail in the coffin of everything he had believed about galactic hierarchy. His gill slits fluttered with rapid, shallow breaths that spoke of a mind struggling to process information that violated the fundamental assumptions of his existence, while his webbed fingers trembled as they traced the energy patterns that defied every law his species had discovered in their 10,000 years of technological advancement. The machine before them wasn't just working. It was working better than anything the Galactic Crown had ever conceived, its efficiency ratings climbing beyond theoretical maximums into realms that their greatest scientists had declared mathematically impossible. Behind him, the other advisors maintained their silence not out of respect, but out of the paralyzing recognition that they were witnessing the collapse of their entire worldview, as if the universe itself had decided to rewrite its rules in favor of a species they had spent centuries teaching to know their place. The Empress's crystalline form began to shift through colors that had never appeared in her emotional spectrum before, deep purples and silver whites that spoke of thoughts too complex and contradictory for her usual palette of imperial certainty. Her 300-year reign had been built on the unshakable foundation that technological mastery belonged to the evolved races, that humans were useful only for their capacity to perform tasks too menial for superior minds to waste time on. Yet now she stood before evidence that shattered that foundation like glass struck by a meteor. The machine's gentle harmonics seemed to mock every speech she had ever given about galactic order, every law she had signed restricting human access to advanced technology, every moment of casual dismissal she had shown toward the species that now held her empire's survival in their supposedly primitive hands. Her advisors watched her internal struggle play out in the shifting patterns of her bioluminescent skin, each color change a visible representation of an empire learning to question its own supremacy. Darian continued his work with the methodical precision of someone who had long ago accepted that his worth would never be measured by the recognition of others. His movements economical and purposeful, as he fine-tuned systems that operated on principles the Empire's best minds couldn't begin to comprehend. The tools in his hands, salvaged components and jury-rigged interfaces, somehow achieved what the Crown's most advanced laboratories had failed to accomplish with unlimited resources and centuries of research. And each adjustment he made sent new waves of impossible energy through the Citadel's grid. His face remained calm, almost meditative, as if the presence of the most powerful beings in the galaxy was no more significant than the arrival of another maintenance shift, and that tranquility in the face of their shock somehow made his achievement even more devastating to their sense of superiority. The Empress found herself studying the way his weathered hands moved across his creation, searching for some sign of the alien influence or hidden technology that could explain this impossibility, but finding only the quiet competence of a human who had simply refused to accept the limitations others had placed on his species. The implications of what they were witnessing began to cascade through the minds of the assembled aliens like a virus of revelation, each new understanding more destructive to their established order than the last. If this human could create technology that surpassed their greatest achievements, what did that say about the millions of other humans scattered across the galaxy, cleaning their flaws and maintaining their systems while harboring capabilities that could reshape civilization itself? The machine pulsed again, its energy output climbing to levels that made their most advanced power cores look like flickering candles. And with each pulse came the undeniable recognition that they had built their empire on a foundation of willful blindness. Lord Keithmore's display showed efficiency ratings that climbed beyond anything in their databases, while secondary readings revealed that the human's device was somehow improving the performance of every system it touched, as if his understanding of energy dynamics operated on principles that made their own technology seem crude and primitive by comparison. The silence in the chamber had weight now, pressing down on the assembled dignitaries like the gravity of a collapsing star, each moment of quiet acknowledgement that their entire civilization had been built on a lie about human inferiority. Zalur's retinue shifted uncomfortably as they watched their empress struggle with concepts that threatened to unmake everything she had ever believed about her right to rule. Their own certainties crumbling as they realized that the being they had dismissed as barely worthy of notice had just demonstrated capabilities that placed him among the most advanced minds in galactic history. The machine's harmonics seemed to grow stronger, as if feeding on their recognition, and the energy readings showed that Darian's creation wasn't just sustaining the Citadel's power grid, it was actively improving it, optimizing systems that had remained unchanged for centuries, and revealing inefficiencies that their greatest engineers had never even suspected existed. In the space of minutes, a human janitor had accomplished what their entire technological civilization had failed to achieve in millennia of advancement. The weight of that recognition settled over the chamber like a shroud, transforming the assembled aliens from the galaxy's ruling elite into witnesses to their own obsolescence, while the human who had made it all possible continued his work with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had always known that worth wasn't determined by the opinions of those too blind to see it. The machine pulsed once more, sending another wave of perfect energy through the Citadel's systems, and with it came the inescapable understanding that the galaxy's future would be written not by those who had claimed superiority through birthright, but by those who had earned it through the patient application of genius that others had been too arrogant to recognize. The Empress stood frozen in the face of this revelation, her crystalline form cycling through colors that had no names, while around her the foundations of galactic civilization shifted like sand beneath the weight of one human's impossible achievement. The first crack in the Empire's facade appeared not in the machine's energy output, but in the trembling of Lord Kethmore's voice as he attempted to maintain the fiction that what they were witnessing could somehow be explained within the boundaries of their established understanding. His words came in stuttering bursts, each syllable fighting against the evidence of his own senses as he tried to formulate theories that could preserve the illusion of alien superiority while accounting for the impossible reality humming before them. The other advisors watched his struggle with the fascination of beings witnessing the collapse of their own certainties, their various forms of communication, bioluminescent patterns, pheromone releases, harmonic frequencies, creating a symphony of confusion that filled the chamber with the scent and sound of an empire learning to doubt itself. Behind them all, the machine continued its perfect operation, its energy output climbing steadily beyond every theoretical limit their civilization had established, each new peak a hammer blow against the walls of their constructed reality. Darian's hands moved across his creation's interface with the fluid grace of a conductor guiding an orchestra through a symphony that only he could hear. His fingers dancing across controls that responded to touches so subtle they seemed more like thoughts than physical contact. The device itself seemed to anticipate his needs, surfaces shifting and reconfiguring themselves to present exactly the tools and readouts he required, as if the boundary between creator and creation had dissolved into something that transcended the mechanical relationships their empire understood. His breathing remained steady and calm, a stark contrast to the increasingly frantic respiratory patterns of the aliens surrounding him. And that tranquility in the face of their mounting panic somehow made his mastery even more absolute and undeniable. The Empress found herself studying not just his technique, but the way his entire being seemed to resonate with the machine's harmonics, as if human consciousness operated on frequencies that her species had never learned to perceive. The energy readings began to tell a story that shattered every assumption the Galactic Crown had built its power upon, revealing not just that human technology could match their own, but that it operated on principles so advanced that their greatest scientists appeared primitive by comparison. Each data stream flowing across their displays showed systems optimizing themselves in ways that violated the fundamental laws of thermodynamics as they understood them. Efficiency curves climbing beyond theoretical maximums into realms that suggested the human's understanding of energy dynamics transcended the physical limitations that had constrained their civilization for millennia. Lord Kethmore's aquatic features had gone pale with the realization that his species' 10,000 years of technological development had somehow missed principles that this human had discovered while cleaning their floors, and the implications of that oversight crashed over him like a tsunami of intellectual devastation. The machine pulsed again, and with each pulse came new revelations about the crude limitations of their supposedly advanced technology. The transformation in the chamber's atmosphere was palpable, as if the very air had become charged with the electricity of paradigms shifting and worldviews crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. Zhe-Lu's crystalline form had begun to emit frequencies that her retinue had never heard before, harmonic patterns that spoke of a mind grappling with concepts too vast and revolutionary for her established neural pathways to process without fundamental restructuring. Her 3 centuries of absolute rule had been built on the unshakable conviction that technological mastery was the birthright of evolved species, that humans were useful only for their capacity to perform tasks too menial for superior minds to waste time on. Yet now she stood before proof that her entire understanding of galactic hierarchy had been not just wrong, but catastrophically, empire-threateningly inverted. The machine's gentle humming seemed to grow louder, or perhaps her perception of it was changing, as she began to understand that she was listening to the sound of her own obsolescence. The other advisors had begun to cluster together in small groups, their various forms of communication creating pockets of frantic discussion as they struggled to process the implications of what they were witnessing. But their conversations kept dissolving into silence as new readings appeared on their displays that defied every attempt at rational explanation. The human's device wasn't just powering the Citadel. It was actively improving every system it touched, optimizing energy flows that had remained static for centuries and revealing inefficiencies that their greatest engineers had never suspected existed. Each improvement cascaded through the station's infrastructure like a wave of technological evolution, transforming crude alien engineering into something approaching the elegance of human design. And the speed of that transformation suggested that Darian's understanding of their systems surpassed that of the beings who had built them. The Empress watched this metamorphosis with growing horror and fascination, realizing that she was witnessing not just the failure of her technology, but the birth of something that could render her entire civilization obsolete. The weight of recognition settled over the assembled aliens like a physical force, pressing them down under the crushing realization that everything they had believed about their place in the universe had been built on foundations of sand and self-deception. The machine pulsed once more, its energy output reaching levels that made their most advanced power cores seem like primitive torches. And with that pulse came the final, inescapable understanding that the galaxy's future belonged not to those who had claimed superiority through accident of birth, but to those who had earned it through the patient application of genius that others had been too blind and arrogant to recognize. Darian continued his work with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had always known this moment would come, his weathered hands guiding forces that could reshape civilization itself. While around him, the representatives of galactic power learned what it meant to stand in the presence of true technological mastery. The first alien to kneel was Lord Kethmore, his aquatic form folding in on itself with the fluid grace of a being whose entire existence had just been redefined by the recognition of his own inadequacy. His gill slits fluttered with rapid, shallow breaths as he lowered himself before the human whose genius had rendered centuries of his species' advancement obsolete, and the sound of his breathing apparatus touching the metal floor echoed through the chamber like the death knell of an empire's arrogance. The other advisors watched in stunned silence as their colleague, a being who had helped shape galactic policy for over 2 centuries, prostrated himself before a creature they had dismissed as barely worthy of cleaning their waste systems. And the sight of his submission sent shockwaves through their established understanding of hierarchy that left them reeling with vertigo. Behind them all, the machine continued its perfect operation, its harmonics seeming to approve of this first acknowledgement of the new order that was being born in the depths of their floating citadel. Empress Zeylu's crystalline form had begun to emit colors that existed at the very edges of her species' emotional spectrum. Deep indigos and silver whites that spoke of a consciousness grappling with the complete inversion of everything she had believed about power and worth. Her 300-year reign had been built on the absolute certainty that technological mastery was the exclusive domain of evolved races, that humans existed only to serve those superior minds that had transcended the limitations of primitive biology. Yet now she stood before evidence that her entire worldview had been not just mistaken, but laughably, catastrophically wrong. The readings flowing across her personal display showed energy outputs that climbed beyond every theoretical maximum her civilization had established. Efficiency curves that violated the fundamental laws of physics as her scientists understood them, and optimization patterns that suggested the human's grasp of energy dynamics operated on principles so advanced that her empire's greatest achievements appeared crude and primitive by comparison. Each new data point was a nail in the coffin of her supremacy, and she could feel the weight of that recognition pressing down on her like the gravity of a collapsing star. The transformation spreading through the chamber was more than physical. It was metaphysical, as if the very concept of hierarchy was being rewritten by forces that transcended the political and social structures the Galactic crown had spent millennia perfecting. One by one, the assembled advisors began to follow Lord Kethmore's example, their various forms folding into positions of submission as they acknowledged the undeniable truth that the being they had dismissed as inferior possessed capabilities that placed him among the most advanced minds in galactic history. The sound of alien bodies touching the metal floor created a rhythm that seemed to harmonize with the machine's gentle humming, as if the device itself was conducting a symphony of recognition that would reshape the balance of power throughout the known universe. Darian continued his work with the calm focus of someone who had always known this moment would come, his weathered hands guiding systems that operated on principles the Empire's greatest scientists couldn't begin to comprehend. The Empress found herself studying the human's face as he worked, searching for some sign of triumph or vindication that would make his superiority easier to accept, but finding only the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who had finally been allowed to demonstrate the full extent of his capabilities. His movements remained economical and purposeful, each adjustment to his creation sending new waves of impossible energy through the Citadel's grid, and the casual competence with which he manipulated forces that could power entire star systems somehow made his mastery even more devastating to her sense of imperial authority. The machine's energy output had stabilized at levels that made her empire's most advanced technology seem like children's toys, while secondary readings showed that his device was actively improving every system it touched, optimizing infrastructure that had remained unchanged for centuries, and revealing inefficiencies that her greatest engineers had never suspected existed. In the space of hours, a human janitor had accomplished what her entire technological civilization had failed to achieve in millennia of advancement. The weight of that recognition finally broke through the last barriers of her resistance, and Empress Zeylu felt her crystalline form beginning to fold as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a tsunami of intellectual devastation. Her advisors watched in stunned silence as their empress, the being who had shaped the destiny of 1,000 worlds, slowly lowered herself before the human whose genius had just rewritten the fundamental equations of galactic power, and the sight of her submission sent shockwaves through the assembled aliens that left them trembling with the recognition of their own obsolescence. The machine pulsed again, its harmonics seeming to acknowledge this final act of recognition, and the energy reading showed that Darian's creation was responding to the changing dynamics in the chamber by optimizing its output even further, as if the device itself understood that it was witnessing the birth of a new order. Around them, the Citadel's systems hummed with unprecedented efficiency, every circuit and conduit transformed by human engineering into something that transcended the crude limitations of alien design. The silence that followed was pregnant with the weight of history being rewritten, as the most powerful beings in the galaxy knelt before a human whose patient genius had just demonstrated that worth was not determined by species or birthright, but by the capacity to transcend the limitations that others accepted as immutable. Darian's hands continued their dance across his creation's interface, guiding forces that could reshape civilization itself, while around him the representatives of galactic power learned what it meant to stand or kneel in the presence of true technological mastery that had been hidden in plain sight for far too long. The machine's gentle humming filled the space where imperial authority had once resided, and in that sound was the promise of a future where genius would be recognized regardless of its source, and where the galaxy's greatest achievements would be born not from arrogance and assumed superiority, but from the patient application of human ingenuity that had always been there, waiting for the moment when it would finally be allowed to shine. The transformation of the Citadel of Calvarith began in the deepest maintenance shafts and spread upward like a tide of technological evolution, each system touched by Darian's machine becoming something greater than its original design had ever imagined possible. The energy conduits that had carried power for centuries suddenly blazed with efficiency ratings that climbed beyond every theoretical maximum the Empire had established, while atmospheric processors that had struggled to maintain basic life support now operated with a precision that created perfect environmental conditions throughout the massive structure. The change was visible in the very walls themselves, as alien engineering that had remained static for millennia began to optimize and improve under the influence of human design principles, transforming the Citadel from a monument to imperial power into a living testament to the genius that had been hidden in its lowest levels. Throughout the floating palace, beings who had never questioned their technological supremacy found themselves surrounded by systems that operated on principles they couldn't comprehend, each improvement a reminder that their understanding of the universe had been fundamentally incomplete. Word of the humans' achievement spread through the galactic communication networks like wildfire, carried by the same alien dignitaries who had once dismissed his species as barely worthy of notice, and with each transmission came the undeniable evidence that everything the Galactic Crown had believed about technological hierarchy had been catastrophically wrong. The energy readings from Calvarith showed output levels that made the Empire's greatest power stations seem primitive by comparison, while efficiency reports revealed that a single human working with salvaged components had accomplished what their most advanced laboratories had failed to achieve with unlimited resources and centuries of research. On worlds throughout the galaxy, alien scientists stared at data streams that violated every law they had established, their various forms of communication creating symphonies of confusion and disbelief as they struggled to process the implications of what they were witnessing. The machine's harmonics, transmitted through subspace channels, seemed to carry with them the sound of an empire learning to question its own foundations. Empress Zaylur remained kneeling in the chamber where her worldview had been shattered, her crystalline form cycling through colors that had no names as she grappled with the complete inversion of everything she had believed about power and worth. The readings on her personal display continued to climb, each new peak a hammer blow against the walls of her constructed reality. While around her, the assembled advisors maintained their positions of submission before the human whose genius had just rewritten the fundamental equations of galactic civilization. The sight of the galaxy's most powerful beings prostrated before a creature they had dismissed as inferior would have been unthinkable mere hours before. Yet now it seemed like the only rational response to the demonstration of capabilities that transcended every assumption their species had made about the limitations of human intelligence. The machine pulsed again, its energy output stabilizing at levels that could power entire star systems. And with each pulse came the recognition that they were witnessing not just the failure of their technology, but the birth of something that could render their entire civilization obsolete. Darian continued his work with the methodical precision that had defined his entire existence, his weathered hands guiding forces that could reshape the galaxy while maintaining the same calm focus he had brought to cleaning floors and maintaining waste systems. The tools in his hands, jury-rigged interfaces and salvaged components, somehow achieved what the Crown's most advanced laboratories had declared impossible. And each adjustment he made sent new waves of optimization through systems that had remained unchanged for centuries. His face remained serene, almost meditative, as if the presence of kneeling empresses and prostrated lords was no more significant than the arrival of another maintenance shift. And that tranquility in the face of their submission somehow made his mastery even more absolute and undeniable. The machine responded to his touch like a living thing, its surfaces shifting and reconfiguring themselves to present exactly the tools and readouts he required, as if the boundary between human consciousness and technological capability had dissolved into something that transcended the mechanical relationships the Empire understood. The implications of what had occurred in the depths of Calvorith began to cascade through the galactic power structure like a virus of revelation, each new understanding more destructive to the established order than the last. If this human could create technology that surpassed their greatest achievements, what did that say about the millions of other humans scattered across the galaxy, performing menial tasks while harboring capabilities that could revolutionize civilization itself? The machine's gentle humming seemed to carry with it the promise of a future where worth would be determined not by species or birthright, but by the capacity to transcend limitations that others accepted as immutable. And that promise sent shockwaves through alien societies that had built their entire existence on assumptions of inherent superiority. On worlds throughout the Empire, beings who had never questioned their place in the galactic hierarchy found themselves staring at evidence that their understanding of intelligence and capability had been not just incomplete, but laughably, catastrophically wrong. The new order that emerged from the depths of the Citadel was not built on conquest or revolution, but on the simple recognition of genius that had always been present but never acknowledged. And as Darian's machine continued its perfect operation, sending waves of unprecedented energy through systems that had never imagined such efficiency was possible, the galaxy began to understand that its future would be written not by those who had claimed superiority through accident of evolution, but by those who had earned it through the patient application of human ingenuity that had been waiting in the shadows for far too long. The Empress and her advisors remained kneeling in the presence of this transformation, their various forms creating a tableau of submission that would be remembered throughout galactic history as the moment when the universe learned that true power belonged not to those who demanded recognition, but to those who had the wisdom and patience to let their work speak for itself. The machine pulsed once more, its harmonics filling the chamber with the sound of a new age being born. And in that sound was the promise that the galaxy's greatest achievements lay not in its past, but in a future where human genius would finally be free to reshape the stars themselves.